Hey guys, so a few lessons ago we went over blood, and now we're going to kind of be building on that a little bit as we jump into the circulatory system. So the circulatory system, I think we're going to spend like maybe 3 days or 3 lessons going over. Today we're going to go over blood vessels. We're also going to do a lesson on the heart, and I think we're going to talk about another lesson where we talk about regulating your heartbeat and stuff like that. So anyway, today's lesson, like I said, is all about blood vessels. So in this lesson, we're going to be going over the different types of blood vessels. So arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venule, and veins. So for each one of those, you need to kind of know its structure, the direction that the blood flows, whether it's oxygenated or deoxygenated blood, and kind of the order that these come in the body. You should also describe the function of capillaries in thermoregulation. You should know something called the pulmonary exception, so essentially what makes the pulmonary veins and arteries different. And then you also need to know the names of major veins and arteries in the body. So arteries are the blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart. They have a really thick wall made up of 3 layers of tissue. Both the inner and outer layers are connective tissue. The middle layer is muscle fibers and then some elastic connective tissue. And the reason that you need such thick walls around the arteries is because it is where the blood pressure is the highest, because the blood has just been pumped out of the heart when it goes into the arteries. The arteries then stretch a lot, and there's a lot of pressure on those walls when the blood is just pushed into them from the heart. And that's actually where you feel your pulse is in arteries, and you're feeling that stretch of blood. Arteries usually carry oxygenated blood, so blood that has oxygen in it. The exception to that is the pulmonary artery, which carries deoxygenated blood. From the arteries, we then get the arterioles. So as the arteries continue traveling away from the heart, they start to branch off into smaller blood vessels called arterioles. They are still carrying blood away from the heart. They're just tinier than arteries. And in this case, the middle layer is smooth muscle and elastic fibers. The arterioles, once again, just like with arteries, usually oxygenated blood. And then those arterioles are going to branch off even more into the smallest type of blood vessels, which are called capillaries. But right between the arterioles and capillaries, those 2 types of blood vessels are separated by something called the precapillary sphincter. The sphincter is, again, just a little ring of muscle that can squeeze closed. Pre-capillary mean that it's just before the capillary. And the whole point of these blood vessels is to squeeze, or sorry, of these sphincters, is to squeeze closed and essentially block off some of the capillaries. And the reason for that is because you have so many capillaries in your body that you actually don't have enough blood to fill them all at once. So your body has to alternate which capillaries are open and which capillaries are closed, and it does that by closing the sphincters. And the autonomic nervous system does control the motor nerves that regulate the diameter of the arterioles. Vasoconstriction is when the smooth muscle of the arterioles constricts. And then vasodilation is just the opposite of that. It's when the muscle of the arterioles dilates. So the muscle relaxes and the arteriole dilates. So vasoconstriction, you're constricting the arteriole, it's getting tinier. Vasodilation, you're relaxing the arteriole, it's getting wider. When you have vasoconstriction in an area, you are decreasing the amount of blood flow to that area. When you have vasodilation, you're increasing the amount of blood flow to that area. And this is really important for thermoregulation. Thermoregulation is one of the ways that our body controls its internal temperature. It includes things like sweating if you're too hot, shivering if you're too cold, but both of those actually require a lot of energy. So it's much easier if your body is dealing with a less drastic temperature change to use vasodilation and vasoconstriction instead. So if you're too hot, your blood vessels will vasodilate near your skin. So the blood vessels near your skin get wider, it allows more blood to flow to your skin. And the reason for that is your blood is really warm. And so if you have more blood near your skin, that heat from your blood will radiate out of your skin to the environment. So having more heat leaving your blood will allow you to cool down. On the other hand, if your body is trying to warm up, it will vasoconstrict the blood vessels near your skin so that you're losing less heat through your skin to the environment. Adrenaline also causes vasodilation and vasoconstriction. Anytime you're afraid, you're going to get that big like adrenaline rush as adrenaline is released into your blood. That will cause vasodilations near your muscles so that your muscles are ready to like run or fight. That's your fight or flight response. And adrenaline also causes vasoconstriction near a lot of areas of your skin in order to move that oxygenated blood to your like heart and lungs and muscles that again you might need in that fight or flight scenario. The vasoconstriction near your skin also means that if you are injured in that fight, like if you get cut or something, you will hopefully lose less blood. Okay, so that is your arterioles that are doing all that vasoconstriction and vasodilation and stuff. And then again, between the arterioles and the capillaries, we have that precapillary sphincter. And then if that sphincter is open, the blood will go from your arteriole into the capillaries. The capillaries are the smallest blood vessels. They are only a single layer of cells thick. And that's important because this is the site of gas exchange between the blood and your cells. So what that means is it is at the capillaries that oxygen moves from your blood into the cells so that the cells can use it for cellular respiration. It's also where carbon dioxide moves from your cells back into your blood so that it can get to your lungs for you to breathe out. So yeah, in most places in your body, at most of the cells, that's going to be the direction of diffusion. You will have oxygen diffusing from your blood into your cells, and then you will have carbon dioxide diffusing from your cells into your blood. The one exception to that rule is, of course, in the lungs, where carbon dioxide will be moving out of those capillaries and oxygen will be moving in. But everywhere else in your body, the oxygen moves out of the capillaries, the carbon dioxide moves in. Other substances can also diffuse into and out of the capillaries, like proteins and amino acids and stuff like that, different nutrients. In the brain, most of the capillaries are open all of the time, but in the rest of your body, only about like 1/50th of the capillaries are open. Since capillaries are also very, very tiny, and their outer layer is only a single layer of cells thick, they are broken very easily, and that's usually what causes bruising. Is you've broken the you've like hit your arm or whatever, and you've broken the capillaries in that area, and then obviously the blood flows into that area until it clots. So yeah, these are just kind of what this would look like. So the largest blood vessels that are going away from the heart are the arteries. They branch out into the arterioles, which branch out even further into the capillaries. And then what's going to happen after the capillaries is that they all branch back together into venules, which then combine to form veins. In this case, in this diagram here, the red blood vessels are oxygenated, the blue are deoxygenated, and the capillaries are right in the middle there where the oxygen is leaving the blood, and then the blood is becoming deoxygenated as it goes through the capillaries. This is the same kind of image over here. So this is the artery coming away from the heart. As you can see, it has really thick walls, lots of layers. That's going to branch out further into the arterioles, which have narrower walls, which branches out into the capillaries, which have only one layer of cells. And then those are going to come together to form the venules and then the veins. And then as you can see here, we have the oxygenated blood coming from the heart. As it goes through the capillaries, it's going to lose that oxygen. That oxygen will diffuse out to the tissues, and then waste products like carbon dioxide will diffuse into the capillaries from there. So like I said, after the capillaries, those capillaries are going to kind of branch back together to form the venules. At this point, it is, in most parts of the body, going to be deoxygenated because the oxygen has left the blood in the capillaries. The walls of the venules contain smooth muscle, unlike the capillaries, which are only that one layer of cells. And then the venules are going to come together to make the veins. The veins are the blood vessels that carry blood from the body towards the heart. The blood in the vein is usually deoxygenated, with the exception of the pulmonary vein, which carries oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. But generally speaking, it's deoxygenated. The blood pressure is also quite low in the veins. It's lost a lot of its pressure and momentum as it has gone through this entire process from arteries to arterioles to capillaries to venules and now to veins. So it's actually really difficult for the blood to get back up to your heart from like your feet and your lower legs. And so instead of just having enough pressure to kind of pump up your body, the veins need to contain one-way valves. So these one-way valves are essentially valves that the blood can push up through them, and the valves will open up to let the blood come upwards. But then if the blood tries to come back down again, they close. So it's a one-way valve. So the blood comes up through the valve, and then that heartbeat stops for a moment because you have spaces between the beats of your heart. So the heart pumps, the blood goes up through the valve, and then between beats, that blood would fall back down, but the valve stops it. So yeah, it essentially stops your blood from just like back pooling and getting stuck in your feet. The skeletal muscles can also contract around your veins to help push the blood upwards. Veins do store about 65% of the blood in your body because the blood is just moving like one section of valve at a time. Blood flow through the veins can increase at times of stress to help your body meet oxygen demands. So this is kind of what it looks like. So during like the pump of the heart, the valves would be pushed open by the blood that's getting pushed upwards. And then in that break between pumps, the blood would try and fall back down, but the valves would close against that pressure of the blood trying to come back down. Okay, let's go over some major veins and arteries. You do need to know the names of all of these veins and arteries. You need to know whether or not they are carrying oxygenated or deoxygenated blood and where we would find them. Also, just remember, anytime it says artery, it's moving away from the heart. Anytime it says vein, it's moving towards the heart. So the aorta is the main artery leaving the heart, going towards the body. It carries oxygenated blood, and then it splits off into all of the other arteries. The inferior vena cava is the main blood vessel carrying deoxygenated blood to the heart from the bottom half of the body. And then the superior vena cava is the main blood vessel carrying deoxygenated blood from the top of the body back to the heart. The renal artery carries blood to the kidney. The renal vein carries blood from the kidney to the heart. The carotid artery carries blood from the heart to the brain. The jugular vein carries blood from the brain back down through the neck to the heart. The femoral artery goes past your femur, so it is in your thigh. Goes right down kind of the middle of your thigh on the inside. So again, femoral artery is going to be away from the heart. Femoral vein is back to the heart, again, traveling through that thigh. The subclavian is subclavicle, so it's underneath your clavicle or your collarbone. So the artery is going from your heart, away from your heart, down your arms. The subclavian vein comes from the arms back to your heart. And then the pulmonary arteries and veins, I've highlighted them here because they are the exception to the rule. The pulmonary artery carries blood away from the heart to the lungs. The pulmonary vein carries blood from the lungs to the heart. However, the pulmonary artery is the only artery that carries deoxygenated blood. Pulmonary vein is the only vein that carries oxygenated blood. So they're backwards from the normal arteries and veins in terms of what type of blood they carry. So that's the pulmonary exception. The fact that the pulmonary vein and the pulmonary artery are the only two blood vessels where the vein is the one that's oxygenated and the artery is the one that's deoxygenated. The pulmonary artery is also the only artery that's not connected to the aorta, and the pulmonary vein is the only vein not connected to either the superior or inferior vena cava. All other veins carry deoxygenated blood and go back to the heart through the vena cava, and all other arteries carry oxygenated blood and leave the heart through the aorta. So this is just kind of showing all of these things. Again, red is usually oxygenated. Yeah, red is oxygenated, blue is deoxygenated. So you can see the subclavian arteries and veins going out to the arms, the carotid artery and jugular vein going up through the neck. We have our femoral vein and femoral artery going down the thigh. You've got the renal vein and the renal artery going to the two little kidneys. The pulmonary vein, you can't actually see where the lungs are on here, but the pulmonary vein would be going to the lungs, and the pulmonary artery would be going to the lungs. The aorta is that big blood vessel there. Our vena cava, you can see kind of attaching to the bottom and the top of the heart. You do not need to know the mesenteric artery or the iliac artery or vein or the hepatic vein. We're also going to talk later about the coronary arteries. There are a bunch of diseases that affect blood vessels. Atherosclerosis, also called arterial disease, is when you have too many lipids or fats build up on the inside of your arteries. And what happens is you get all that fat building up on the inside of your arteries, which is like kind of sticky, and then these minerals get deposited in that fat buildup. And so the inside of the artery becomes narrower and narrower and narrower as all this stuff starts building up on the inside of it. And eventually it can just lead to such high blood pressure because you're having the same amount of blood trying to squeeze through a smaller space, so it's pushing out harder on that artery wall. So you have this higher blood pressure, and it can eventually lead to a heart attack. There can also be an aneurysm, which is a bulge that forms if an area of a blood vessel becomes too weak. That can be caused by arterial disease. It can also happen just randomly in some people. And aneurysms can be deadly. They can also cause strokes if they happen in the brain. And then there's something called varicose veins, which is when the valves, those one-way valves in the veins become damaged and the blood starts to kind of flow backward and pool in the veins. That can happen with prolonged standing, and there's also a genetic component to that. So this is what varicose veins look like. They're not really dangerous. Some people just find them kind of unsightly. This is what an aneurysm would look like. So you'd have like a bulge forming, like where a weak spot is in the artery, and it can just burst, which can be quite deadly. And then this is what a normal artery would look like with its nice thick walls, but also lots of space for the blood to flow through. And this is what arterial disease would look like, where you have this buildup of fats and stuff, which makes the actual opening for the blood to flow through very, very tiny. It can be quite deadly. Okay, that is it for today's lesson. We will go more in depth into some of these blood vessels like the aorta and the vena cavas in the next lesson.